I'm going to read two poems from one of my earlier collections, Acoustic Shadow, which was reprinted in Intimate Geography by Blood Axe. And then I'm going to read one of my new poems from my forthcoming collection, Appalachian Fall. This is called Below One's Best. The wind outside is living its own life with a water roar, as young as sex, and in direct communication with insurgent corpuscles in the veins. I remember how somewhere in Havershall's diaries he fears all tremor at appearances, self-doubt and routine, and consequently living below one's best. An autumn wind will wake that mood. It can nearly make one cry at its casual accusation, as if the wind were a man of action. One knows the best is not out there, and yet there is a power in hearing clouds fragment as dragon ruins, and cold ecstasy fill air again, as it throws light down at the doorway in a bright, insulting handful of coins. The next one's called Mandela in New York. It was written just after Mandela was released from prison, and the wife in it is Winnie. We see the pathos first, the tight control, the effort to be present often, to be seen to be free, and to show freedom's virile exuberance, at least, in the small strength of a smile. His wife is robust with relief, defiant with it, and her movements are a little abrupt, still from that violence of waiting. Their outlines seem clearer than others. Their shadows seem tight with purpose, as if the first loss is not time or health, so much as forever of the freedom to escape to the purposeless self. He walks slowly, precisely, and smiles. This is George Jeffreys' 21. There are some George Jeffreys poems coming up in Appalachian Fall and some poems about other things. So George Jeffreys' 21, George Jeffreys woke up in Thirroul again. George Jeffreys woke up in Thirroul again, a windy wilderness of black sea night thrashing in waves at the French windows. He channel surfed the wilderness TV, the quiet baby Corbin on his knee but not asleep. George remembered that his grandson and daughter had been stormy babies, but had deeply slept more than this one. Here you looked back checking and the eyes were open. George and Corbin watched the screen together. Trump was explaining another liaison with the Russians, but slapped more sanctions on them. George suggested to his son, they may have agreed to this as a sort of trade concession, in return for no one carving up the Middle East. Somewhere behind the lustrous lapis eyes the baby stored that. Claire called out, but he kept the deep state and the Appalachians happy by banning trans-sex in the military. It's his trade-off that worry me most. The baby seemed to nod, and Claire came out from the bedroom, tying the satin sash of a wrap too tight around her waist that was so much more finely defined now between her hips, silk, and her breasts. She had woken in a fevered mix of ardour and irritation, satisfied both moods by kneeling down beside them, her moist head on his other knee, in eye equality with the baby, who crowed with pleasure suddenly. Claire's nocturnal marine eyes looked more blue in the TV light. They didn't use the TV as much now, more the internet, but it was still the best nursery nightlight ever. He rested his free hand on her hunched shoulder. Then, when that was accepted, his fingers deep in her sleek, thick hair. She said, Idris said on the phone, the Russians still seem okay about him working out his Bitcoin for the Palestinians. It must be that the Israelis have accepted the idea. Or some of them, amended George. It's still that thing my old mate in Langley said about intelligence. It's always made of heads that hate each other. But I grant you Tel Aviv has less of them than Washington. She said, I'm sick of murder, meaning her own and every other that they had ever witnessed, as if permitting their own tamed trauma, the wildness in stylized ballet. The ballet of Trump and Russians progressed on several channels. She said, Well, MI6 is still in strategic retreat after creating ISIS, hopefully. It gives Trump scope to do these great Russian pas de deux. The man is Nureyev. She didn't know the name of a more modern Russian dancer, but thought there had probably in limbed male passion never been another Rudy anyway. Although Trump hardly walked straight on the tarmac, she had started to absorb the peacefulness of little Corbyn's eyes and George's fingers. She said, "You're not angry with me anymore." He answered, "Well, you didn't die in childbirth, did you?" She pursed her lips as if testing wine on her tongue tip. "Well, I did try not to, for your sake. It was lucky he arrived before the ambulance, however. I survive much better when I'm in charge these days." The blue breeze from the wall of windows reached their skin, driven by the knowledge that dawn was arriving. In its summer duplicity, it was both like a fevered hand and the eyes it craves. She settled herself on the floor more comfortably, felt calmer, let her skin drink the air as they watched the news in its comfort rhythm break bearably like adult grief in waves.